Hey guys, welcome back to BIM Rules of Engagement. This particular rule we're talking about, don't try to justify bullish BIM systems. Now I don't know if you've ever heard of something called the marshmallow test. It's part of a famous social science research experiment. You should try it on your kids one day. But here's the idea. Put a marshmallow in front of a child and tell him or her that they can have a second one if they can go 15 minutes without eating the first one and then leave the room. And whether they're patient enough, they'll probably double their pay. And supposedly, this is supposed to be an indicative of willpower that pay dividends down the line, hopefully after school or eventually into their career path. But by passing that test, it's a promising signal of future success for your child. Now, the same principle applies if you're asking a project team that, let's say, are exposed to new advancing BIM technology. And especially when it comes to these new industry software tools that we're all getting to experience to see their vast capabilities. And there seems to be a vast interest from individuals who seem to dive into these new applications. But sometimes they're also the white elephant in the room. And sometimes they're just stupid systems that maybe are sold by software vendors who have their own bullish ingrained ideas of what they think BIM is. And we have all witnessed how technology is advancing faster than we can actually adopt it. So maybe some of us, it's worth the wait to watch and learn how other people make mistakes before we invest further and hope that your investment is not just within the software, but it's also in the actual process as well as the people at the same time. Now I bet we've all seen companies who've got dozens of useless systems that consume expensive resources within the organization. And in fact, it's often less than 5% of its functionality that is being used. But best not try to justify this system. If you can't change the software, just put up with it. Get on with it. And don't try to trick staff, let alone project teams, into thinking that it's all fabulous and that the system actually does more than the 5%. You will lose that respect and maybe even that trust in convincing people that it's maybe just fine when you know it's not. You also need to keep those expectations realistic. And I hope that you go down this road, because I've been down this road, when it actually bites back at you eventually. And while the construction industry globally is facing this major downturn, especially during this epidemic, there are many software vendors as well as training companies out there that maybe could change your fortune and going forward in this new digital built environment. But remember, by future-proofing yourself as an individual, by maybe doing, let's say, online self-learning, you can suddenly stay ahead of that curve. I saw an interesting post on LinkedIn recently asking the viewers to vote what their best learning way of learning was. And almost 80% of them said it's self-taught online. The unfortunate truth is that there is always a cost-cutting or even retrenchments and reducing of licensed software when times are bad. And this is all fine, but when the market turns up again, companies have to scramble to either re-employ raw talent or even buy software again. And while training those staff, may they be old and new, on these new systems, those employable staff are already ahead of the game. They have already taken, unfortunately, that company again back to square one. Now, Sean McCormick is our mentor for this week, and he's a senior BIM advisor with BRE, the building research establishment within the UK, who are also a world-leading multidisciplinary building science centre, with the mission also to improve buildings through research and knowledge generation. And it's also their aim to deliver industry objectives through the use of BIM, while also having to deal with well-ingrained industry systems.
Hello, my name is Sean McCormick, Senior BIM Advisor for the Building Research Establishment within the UK. I've been invited today to respond to Don't Try Justify Bullish BIM Systems. Having read through the synopsis of this rule, I've identified the following questions which I believe are being asked, and I hope to answer the best I can from my own experience and understanding. So the questions are as follows. Number one, how does one ensure that the IT solution being invested in by an organization is fit for purpose? Secondly, how does one leverage the benefits software solutions can provide an organization to help stay relevant and competitive in the AEC market? And lastly, how does one manage software licenses within an organization whose resources are in continuous state of flux? Before answering these questions, I would like to tell you about my own experience and lay the groundwork for my own understanding of BIM to contextualize the problem being addressed. A few years back, I was employed as BIM manager within a prominent London-based architectural practice. Part of my role was to implement a common way of working using BIM based on best practices as defined by the national standards of the time, namely PAS 1192 suite of documents. As part of this process, I undertook a review of software required as a minimum to enable a suitable BIM implementation plan. To my annoyance and frustration, my plan was met with resistance by the board. It transpired that a few years previously, a software vendor had approached the practice and sold them a software solution that was supposed to bring the practice up to speed using BIM, producing and delivering information more efficiently and in line with a new way of working in a digital environment. However, it soon transpired that the software solution could not deliver what had been promised, as it did not suit the workflows that had made the business a success in the first place. Another major factor in this failure was the resistance of users towards using the software on design projects. Needless to say, the software solution was shelved, costing the organization over £100,000 in software and training alone, not to mention the costs of time wasted trying to fit a square into a round hole. Because of this, the business was not prepared to adopt my BIM implementation plan, resulting in me leaving my post shortly after, feeling that I had failed in my job. My own experience is not an uncommon one. I see similar issues nearly every day in my current job as an auditor, and is partly down to what I term the BIM elephant problem. From my perspective, the problem lies in the fact that BIM holds a different meaning for different stakeholders depending on what it is they need from it. When explaining this problem to people, I like to use the analogy of BIM being an elephant in a blind man's world. Each stakeholder represents a blind person who has been asked to describe what an elephant is by touching different aspects of it depending on where they are positioned. For example, the client whose focus is on projects will be driven by profit might be at the front of the elephant touching its tusks and may describe it as a spear. A construction lawyer whose focus is on litigation may be touching the trunk and describe it as a snake. A structural engineer whose focus is on the structural analysis of a project may touch the ear and describe it as a fan. A contractor whose focus is on how to stay competitive and win more bids may describe the stomach as a wall. And finally, the MEP who is primarily concerned with the coordination of mechanical, electrical and plumbing disciplines and positioned at the rear of the elephant may mistake the tail for rope. The point of this analogy is no one stakeholder has a clear understanding of what they are really dealing with, but they all know what they want, believing that their version of BIM will deliver the project successfully, only to be disappointed when it does not. Without the collaboration and common understanding, they are not able to identify the BIM elephant for what it really is. Unfortunately, vendors flogging software have taken advantage of this confusion by promising solutions as silver bullets to resolve problems that exist through traditional ways of working. To overcome this issue, it is important that all stakeholders have a common understanding of what the proverbial BIM elephant looks like. I define BIM as the following, which captures the essence of the now defunct BIM task group's definition as well as the latest ISO 19650 Part 2 definition. BIM is essentially the usage of more efficient, integrated, collaborative processes, workflows, roles, standards, policies, and digitization to conduct construction or infrastructure projects via information management delivered by people and enabled by technology. To add another level of complexity to this problem, the acronym BIM is used interchangeably in conversations without the understanding that it could mean three different terms, namely BIM as in building information model, the thing that is being produced, BIM as in building information modeling, how the thing is produced, and BIM as in building information management, a management process which determines who produces what thing and when. Further to this understanding of the three BIMs, there is also the aspect of capability and maturity to consider. The capability of individuals and organizations to deliver each form of BIM is dependent on their levels of maturity and capability in industry. By this I mean, in order to deliver information modeling, one first has to become competent in delivering the information model, and in order to deliver information management on a project, one has to become competent in producing the information model and information modeling. The government, being aware of this progressive adoption of the three BIMs, put together a roadmap, or wedge, as part of their BIM Level 2 strategy, which was intended to get industry working to a level of maturity and capability. Within the context of the latest standards, we now talk about delivering BIM in accordance with ISO 19650 Part 2 and Stage 2 BIM rather than Level 2 BIM. However, the principles are still the same. Without a common understanding of what BIM and the terminology that surrounds it is, organizations are doomed to succumb to the BIM elephant trap and being more prone to being misled by vendors wanting to make a quick buck. If we start to unpack my definition of BIM, it is clear to see that it consists of four main ingredients, namely policy, process, people, and technology. And when it comes to implementing BIM in an organization, all four ingredients need to be considered in the implementation plan, as each one is intrinsically linked with the others. Adding to this, understanding where your organization's capability and maturity levels are will provide a clearer picture of what considerations should be made when selecting software solutions and how this sits with the implementation plan. So, when purchasing new BIM software for an organization, one needs to consider all four elements of the BIM before committing to this decision. And if we understand that BIM as an information management is a process with adopted policies delivered by people, we then start to understand the context where technology sits within the organization's BIM implementation strategy. So to answer the first question, how does one ensure that the IT solution being invested in by an organization is fit for purpose? An organization needs to determine what level of maturity it is able to deliver on. To work at the level prescribed by ISO 19650 Part 2, organizations are expected to deliver information collaboratively within the information management cycle. And depending where you are in the supply chain, you may need to purchase and provide access to a suitable common data environment solution. ISO 19650 Part 1 provides an outline of what is expected from a competent CDE solution, including aspects such as security requirements and workflow considerations such as automated checking. And if you are involved in the production of information on a project, you need to consider a suitable BIM authoring tool as well. However, the BIM authoring tool should suit the method of building information modeling adopted within the workflow typically used by the organization on projects. To do this, one should consider the outputs typically delivered by the organization. One should also consider whether these outputs are suitable for the projects that the organization is typically involved in. Another factor that may need to be considered is the interoperability of the tool being used. If, for example, the organization is part of a regular supply chain within a framework, then adopting tools which are interoperable with other stakeholders makes sense. Although IFC is another option to exchange information using open data source formats where interoperability is an issue, this solution brings its own issues. The next question to answer is, how does one leverage the benefits software solutions can provide an organization to help stay relevant and competitive in the AEC market? To me, this is down to how well an organization gets to know its tool of choice. It's always a good idea for organizations, whether you are an SME or larger organization, to allocate resource to research and development and to get your tech-minded employees involved in pushing the software to its limits. It also may be a good idea to observe how other stakeholders on a project work with similar tools. Each organization needs to consider their own strategy when considering how best to answer this question. The last question, How does one manage software licenses within an organization whose resources are in a continuous state of flux? I find this question a little more challenging, but I'll try and answer it the best I can. It's all about having an appropriate software license strategy, in my view. Now, depending on what tool you use, whether it's Revit, ArchiCAD, Tekla, or any other BIM authoring tool, the licensing models offered by vendors may vary. Some of these vendors offer a subscription-based model for their licenses, where others provide a perpetual licensing model. The type of license model needs to be considered within the license strategy. From what I see in industry, organizations plan their license strategy at the beginning of the financial year to ensure that costs are budgeted for. Costs are generally agreed on between the CFO and the BIM manager. The BIM manager will probably look at a planned capacity for the number of license seats that are projected to be needed based on the current and future projects for that coming year. The smaller organizations, where projects are generally smaller and a year may be too long a period to purchase licenses for, there are other license models offered by vendors that allow renting for as little as 3 months. In essence, a good BIM manager worth their salt will always be able to maximize the use of licenses to limit the number of licenses sitting dormant on their systems. The last area to address with regards to software licensing involves the CDE solution. If you are required to provide a CDE solution, this can be a costly affair, especially with the larger products that are out there. My recommendation on this is to see how you can use your current software inventory to fulfill this requirement. If you are forced to adopt a more costly solution, then ensure that you choose a solution that is right for your organization. In terms of managing the costs involved, I know a number of organizations that absorb the cost into the project costs, which means that the client ends up paying for the solution in the long term. This brings me to the end of my talk. This is not an in-depth literature review, but an essay on my own thoughts in answering the questions posed. Don't try justifying bullish BIM systems. Thank you.